Schlegel. God help those who have none. But this is something quite new, said Mrs. Munt, who collected new ideas as a squirrel collects nuts, and was especially attracted by those that are portable. New for me. Sensible people have acknowledged it for years. You and I and the Wilcoxes stand upon money as upon islands. It is so firm beneath our feet that we forget its very existence. It's only when we see someone near us tottering that we realize all that an independent income means. Last night, when we were talking up here around the fire, I began to think that the very soul of the world is economic, and that the lowest abyss is not the absence of love, but the absence of coin. I call that rather cynical. So do I, but Helen and I, we ought to remember, when we are tempted to criticize others, that we are standing on these islands, and that most of the others are down below the surface of the sea. The poor cannot always reach those whom they want to love, and they can hardly ever escape from those whom they love no longer. We rich can. Imagine the tragedy last June if Helen and Paul Wilcox had been poor people, and couldn't invoke railways and motor cars to part them. That's more like socialism, said Mrs. Munt suspiciously. Call it what you like. I call it going through life with one's hands spread open on the table. I'm tired of these rich people who pretend to be poor and think it shows a nice mind to ignore the piles of money that keep their feet above the waves. I stand each year upon 600 pounds and Helen upon the same, and Tibby will stand upon 8, and as fast as our pounds crumble away into the sea, they are renewed. From the sea, yes, from the sea. And all our thoughts are the thoughts of 600-pounders, and all our speeches. And because we don't want to steal umbrellas ourselves, we forget that below the sea people do want to steal them, and do steal them sometimes, and that what's a joke up here is down there reality. There they go. There goes Fräulein Mosbach. Really, for a German, she does dress charmingly. Oh, what is it? Helen was looking up at the Wilcoxes' flat. Why shouldn't she? I beg your pardon, I interrupted you. What was it you were saying about reality? I had worked round to myself as usual, answered Margaret in tones that were suddenly preoccupied. Do tell me this, at all events. Are you for the rich or for the poor? Too difficult. Ask me another. Am I for poverty or for riches? For riches. Hurrah for riches. For riches, echoed Mrs. Munt, having, as it were, at last secured her nut. Yes, for riches. Money forever. So am I, and so, I am afraid, are most of my acquaintances at Swanage. But I am surprised that you agree with us. Thank you so much, Aunt Julie. While I have talked theories, you have done the flowers. Not at all, dear. I wish you would let me help you in more important things. Well, would you be very kind? Would you come round with me to the registry office? There's a housemaid who won't say yes but doesn't say no. On their way thither, they too looked up at the Wilcoxes' flat. Evie was in the balcony, staring most rudely, according to Mrs. Munt. Oh, yes, it was a nuisance. There was no doubt of it. Helen was proof against a passing encounter. But Margaret began to lose confidence. Might it reawake the dying nerve if the family were living close against her eyes? And Frida Mosbach was stopping with them for another fortnight, and Frida was sharp, abominably sharp, and quite capable of remarking, "You love one of the young gentlemen opposite, yes?" The remark would be untrue, but of the kind which, if stated often enough, may become true. Just as the remark, "England and Germany are bound to fight," renders war a little more likely each time that it is made, and is therefore made the more readily by the gutter press of either nation. Have the private emotions also their gutter press? Margaret thought so, and feared that good Aunt Julie and Frida were typical specimens of it. They might, by continual chatter, lead Helen into a repetition of the desires of June. Into a repetition they could not do more. They could not lead her into lasting love. They were, she saw it clearly, journalism. Her father, with all his defects and wrong-headedness, had been literature, and had he lived he would have persuaded his daughter rightly. The registry office was holding its morning reception. A string of carriages filled the street. Miss Schlegel waited her turn and finally had to be content with an insidious, temporary, being rejected by genuine housemaids on the ground of her numerous stares. Her failure depressed her, and though she forgot the failure, the depression remained. On her way home she again glanced up at the Wilcoxes' flat and took the rather matronly step of speaking about the matter to Helen. "Helen, you must tell me whether this thing worries you." "If what?" said Helen, who was washing her hands for lunch. "The W's coming." "No, of course not." "Really?" "Really." Then she admitted that she was a little worried on Mrs. Wilcox's account. She implied that Mrs. Wilcox might reach backward into deep feelings and be pained by things that never touched the other members of that clan. "I shan't mind if Paul points at her house and says, 'There lives the girl who tried to catch me,' but she might." "If even that worries you, we could arrange something. There's no reason we should be near people who displease us or whom we displease thanks to our money. We might even go away for a little." "Well, I'm going away. Frida's just asked me to Stettin, and I shan't be back till after New Year. Will that do? Or must I fly the country altogether? Really, Meg, what has come over you to make such a fuss?" "No, I'm getting an old maid, I suppose. I thought I minded nothing, but really I should be bored if you fell in love with the same man twice, and," she cleared her throat, "you did go red, you know, when Aunt Julie attacked you this morning. I shouldn't have referred to it otherwise." But Helen's laugh rang true as she raised a soapy hand to heaven and swore that never, nowhere, and nohow would she again fall in love with any of the Wilcox family, down to its remotest collaterals. End of chapter 7.